He wasn't thinking about patriotism or the flag. He was thinking about his sister Martha, whose cough was getting worse in the damn cabin. He was thinking about the humiliation of having to step off the sidewalk for a white boy who hadn't shaved yet. He was thinking about a destiny forged not in service, but in escape.
Welcome to Inside WWII. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe my channel.
The Obsidian Eye, Chapter 1. The Weight of the Badge. Humble beginnings often hide the most lethal potential. The air in the Mississippi Delta hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from humidity, the stench of stagnant water, and the faint, sweet decay of overripe honeysuckle. It was the summer of 1941, and Eli Thorne was 18, but the weariness in his eyes made him look far older. He stood in a patch of dust outside the ramshackle two-room cabin he called home, the sun beating down on his neck like a hammer. In his hands he held a weathered leather-bound copy of Moby Dick, which he had borrowed was the polite word, from the back shelves of the white-only public library, tucked away by a sympathetic janitor. He wasn't reading it, though. He was using the book to steady the rifle. It wasn't a sleek military-issue weapon. It was an old, beat-up Winchester 1894 lever-action, a hunting rifle with a smooth, dark walnut stock and a barrel that showed more history than shine. It had been his father's, and before that his grandfather's. It was the only tangible piece of legacy in a life defined by systemic absence. Eli was practicing the fundamentals that his father, a sharecropper who dreamed of better land, had drilled into him since he was old enough to hold the weight. Sight picture, breath control, and trigger squeeze. His target was a rusty tomato can perched precariously on a fence post 100 yards away. This distance was child's play for a trained marksman, but Eli was training himself for what he wasn't exactly sure. A feeling, a primal urge told him that the precision his father demanded was not just for putting meat on the table. It was for survival in a world that didn't just overlook black men. It actively sought to erase them. Inhale, slow. Feel the heat of the air in your lungs, son. Exhale, easy. Don't fight the earth. Be the earth. He heard his father's voice, a gravelly echo in his mind. Eli inhaled, then let out half the air. The world sharpened. The iron sight aligned with the can. His index finger, steady and calloused, took up the slack on the trigger. Crack! The sound was shockingly loud in the oppressive silence. A puff of dust and rust exploded where the can had been. A direct hit, center mass. He lowered the rifle, the smell of gunpowder stinging his nostrils, a smell he found strangely comforting, a smell of finality and competence. "That's good, Eli," a voice called out, sharp and low. Eli spun around. Standing at the edge of the dust patch, partially obscured by the shadow of a massive live oak, was a man named Silas Reed. Silas wasn't much older than Eli, maybe 24, but he wore a freshly laundered, impeccably pressed suit, a dangerous eccentricity in this part of Mississippi. Silas wasn't a farmer. He was an emissary, a recruiter, but not for the usual labor gangs. "Silas," Eli nodded, his expression flat. He didn't like Silas. He didn't trust him. Silas spoke too easily, and his clothes cost more than Eli's family earned in a year. "Heard that shot from the road. Clean kill. That old girl still has life in her." Silas stepped closer, a briefcase in his hand. "You still readin' that book or just using it for a sandbag?" "Both," Eli said, placing the rifle down gently. "What brings you out here, Silas? Thought you were too busy selling promises in Jackson. Promises are my business, Eli. But today I'm selling opportunity. A real one. A chance to get out of this dust bowl and be part of something bigger. The Army? They'll put me in a kitchen, Silas, or digging latrines. That ain't bigger. The United States military was segregated. Black men were restricted to menial support roles, cooks, truck drivers, stevedores. The idea of a black man being given a position of specialized, high-leverage combat skill was a fantasy. Silas leaned in, his eyes narrowed, the suit jacket brushing against the dry leaves. Not the Army, Eli. Think Marine. Eli snorted, a laugh that held only bitterness. The Marines don't take us, Silas. Everybody knows that. They got their own rules. Caucasian males only, last I heard. Silas opened his briefcase. Inside, nestled on a bed of green felt, wasn't cash or contracts, but a single, official-looking document. It was a newspaper clipping from a black newspaper, the Chicago Defender. They're changing the rules, son. Pearl Harbor did that. They're calling it emergency integration, a loophole. They need men, good men, men who can shoot like you can shoot. Silas's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. The commandant himself just issued an order allowing for the enlistment of black men for general service at a segregated training facility, Montford Point, North Carolina. But this isn't about general service. Silas pulled out a crisply folded letterhead with the seal of the United States Marine Corps. It was a preliminary authorization form, a request for a physical, not an enlistment paper. I'm not recruiting for cooks, Eli. I'm recruiting for a test program. A crazy son-of-a-gun colonel in Quantico is looking for candidates for a highly specialized covert unit. They need men who are invisible, men who can live off the land, men who can put a bullet through a $50 at 300 yards. They don't know you exist, Eli, and that right there is your weapon. Eli looked from the paper to the rifle, and then back down at the dust that defined his life. He wasn't thinking about patriotism or the flag. He was thinking about his sister, Martha, whose cough was getting worse in the damp cabin. He was thinking about the humiliation of having to step off the sidewalk for a white boy who hadn't shaved yet. He was thinking about a destiny forged not in service, but in escape. What's the catch, Silas? Everything got a catch here. Silas smiled, a sharp, predatory flash of teeth. The catch is you gotta be the best. You gotta be willing to take all the mud, all the spit, all the hate, and turn it into fuel. They'll try to break you before you even get a rifle. And if you make it, you'll be a ghost. You won't be a Marine. You'll be a weapon with a rifle. And if you fail, you'll be digging latrines in Montford Point until the war is over. Or worse, you'll be back here with the dirt. Eli picked up his rifle, the steel cool against his palm. He looked at the tomato can's dusty resting place. He knew what he could do with that weapon. He had a skill, a deadly, quiet competency that few men possessed. "I'll go," Eli said, his voice flat, resolute. "But I ain't going for the uniform. I'm going for the badge, the Marine badge. I want them to have to salute me." Silas didn't reply with words. He simply handed Eli the form and a train ticket stub to North Carolina. "Pack light, Eli. Leave the book. You won't have time to read." Montford Point, the crucible of hate. Late 1942. Montford Point, North Carolina, was not a training camp. It was a punishment. It was officially designated a separate and equal facility for the enlistment and training of black Marines. In reality, it was a swampy, forgotten patch of land adjacent to the sprawling Marine Corps base, Camp Lejeune. The barracks were inferior, the training equipment often broken or repurposed junk, and the constant deafening roar of planes and artillery from Camp Lejeune served as a constant reminder of the real Marine Corps they were not allowed to join.
But worse than the physical environment was the relentless psychological assault. Eli Thorne, now Private Thorne, was 6'2" of whipcord muscle, his skin the color of polished mahogany, his eyes perpetually focused. He was one of the first few hundred black men to wear the eagle, globe, and anchor, a sight that infuriated the white drill instructors, or DIs, who were brought in, often against their will, to run the Montfort Point experiment. His own DI, Staff Sergeant Frank Hammer Hogan, was a man whose hate was as palpable as the sweat pouring off his brow. Hogan had a face like a roadmap of bad decisions, and a voice like a rusted hacksaw. "Thorne, you worthless piece of swamp sewage, why in the name of God's green earth are you standing there like a scarecrow in a hurricane? The Marine Corps does not stand still. Move! Move! Move!" The words were always laced with racial slurs, the casual, institutionalized cruelty designed to chip away at the recruit's dignity. Most men lashed out, cracked, or simply retreated into a numb silence. Eli did none of these. He moved with a detached precision. He polished his boots until he could read the fine print on a dime in the reflection. He folded his clothes with such exactitude that the creases could cut glass. He responded to every hateful epithet with a sharp, clear, "Aye, Staff Sergeant." He was perfect, dangerously perfect. His precision on the drill deck translated to the firing range. The M1903 Springfield rifle felt like an extension of his own arm. While other recruits struggled with grouping and adjusting for windage, Eli was consistently firing expert scores, tearing out the bullseye with disturbing regularity. Word of the black ghost on the line reached the ears of the colonel Silas Reed had mentioned, Colonel Alistair Vaught. Vaught was an outlier, a pragmatic man of the old school, who understood one fundamental truth. The enemy's bullet didn't care about the color of the man it hit. He ran the clandestine Scout Sniper program, looking for men with the right mix of patience, independence, and raw lethal skill. He didn't care about background, he cared about results. One blisteringly hot afternoon, while the rest of the platoon was running a muddy, pointless obstacle course, Hogan pulled Eli from the line. "Thorne, front and center, now!" Eli double-timed it, stopping directly in front of the DI. "You think you're better than the other men, Private?" "No, Staff Sergeant. I am striving for excellence, Staff Sergeant." "Excellence? For what, Thorne? So you can serve better coffee? Colonel Vaught wants to see you. Don't mess this up. He's your little charity project. Fail, and I will personally transfer you to a supply depot in the Aleutian Islands. Understand?" "Aye, Staff Sergeant." The devil's bargain. Colonel Vaught's temporary office was a prefabricated hut on the edge of the base, tucked away as if its existence was a mistake. Inside, it smelled of stale pipe tobacco and ozone. Vaught was a massive man, built like a fire hydrant, with closely cropped shock of white hair and the piercing blue eyes of a man who had seen too much war. He sat behind a simple wooden desk, the official Marine Corps CO looking tiny against the polished wood. "At ease, Private Thorne," Vaught said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't look up from a sheaf of papers. Eli stood at a modified parade rest, his hands clasped behind him. "I'm looking at your range scores, Private. Your record is unusual. You shot a 248 out of a possible 250 with the Springfield last week. The two you missed were due to wind drift, not fundamental error. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Private?"
My father, sir, on the farm, taught me to shoot to eat, sir. Vought finally looked up. His eyes didn't hold malice, they held assessment, the look of a man evaluating a tool for a specific job. I don't care about your service to the flag, Private. I care about your service to the mission. The Marine Corps has an immediate, desperate need for specialized reconnaissance and precision elimination. We are going to the Pacific, places where the map is green and the enemy is everywhere. We need eyes that can see what others miss and hands that can deliver finality. Vought leaned forward. I am running a pilot program. It's highly classified. The men in this program will not be wearing the standard uniform. They will be trained to operate independently, as ghosts in small teams. They will be given specialized equipment. They will not be officially recognized as Marines by the General Command until the war is over, if they survive. He paused, letting the weight of the last sentence settle. If you accept this program, you will face an even more brutal specialized training regimen than Montford Point. You will be trained alongside white candidates, which means you will face double the scrutiny, triple the hatred. If you fail, you do not go back to Montford Point. You disappear. If you succeed, you will be one of the most lethal assets the United States has. You will be a sniper, an obsidian eye. Vought picked up a single large, unfamiliar round, a .30-06 round, specialized for long-range work. This is not about being a Marine, Torn. It is about being a professional killer. The enemy is entrenched, desperate, and they do not take prisoners. Your mission will be to destabilize their command and control. You will be asked to kill men from distances where you cannot hear them scream. Can you do that, Private? Eli stood tall, remembering the dust of Mississippi, the fear in his mother's eyes and the quiet dignity of his father's instructions. He wasn't afraid of killing the enemy. He was afraid of failing his escape. Colonel, Eli said, his voice steady as granite. I can put a bullet where you tell me to put a bullet, sir. I have no doubt. Vought slowly nodded. Good. Because the other men, the white men, they fight for the flag. They fight for their country. You will fight for something else, Private Torn. You will fight for the right to be seen. Your success is the only way you can prove that a black man is capable of a job that requires intelligence, patience, and lethal precision. If you fail, the door closes behind you and every other black man who wants to wear this badge. Understood, sir. Report to the transport depot at 0400 hours. You are officially detached from Montford Point. You are now simply a candidate. Your uniform, Private, is a target. Your skill is your shield. Quantico, the test of the invisible. The training facility at Quantico was starkly different from Montford Point. It was silent, hidden deep in the Virginia woods. There were no parade grounds, only rugged, unforgiving terrain. Eli was introduced to his team, a three-man unit. PFC Thomas Tommy Vance, a tall, lanky farm boy from Oregon. He was initially hostile, his face a mask of suspicion. He was a natural mathematician, brilliant with calculating wind and elevation, but his temper was a short fuse. Sergeant Major Saul the Priest Kessel was the team's scout and forward observer, a grizzled veteran of the Banana Wars in Nicaragua. He was a quiet, philosophical Jew from New York. He carried an air of tragedy and used a language of gentle, almost biblical metaphor to describe the ugly business of war. He was the one who reluctantly accepted Eli first, recognizing the shared burden of being an outsider in the Corps.
The first month of training was a grueling, non-stop gauntlet designed to break the mind, not just the body. They were not taught to be soldiers. They were taught to be hunters. Camouflage and concealment. They spent days motionless, buried under foliage, trying to blend into the natural chaos of the forest floor. Kessel taught them the language of the leaves, how to read the wind by the way the pine needles shivered, how to move without disturbing the undergrowth, how to be invisible. One afternoon, Vaught himself walked within 10 feet of Eli, who was encased in a ghillie suit woven from mud, moss, and jute, watching him through a spotting scope. Vaught never saw him. Eli felt a surge of cold, focused power. He was a creature of the earth. Marksmanship at distance. The range was expanded. 500 yards, 700 yards. They were firing at man-sized steel targets, not paper. The instructors forced them to fire in every imaginable condition: rain, fog, high wind, and utter darkness. They were introduced to the M1941 Johnson rifle, and eventually the legendary, more powerful M1903A4 sniper rifle, fitted with a 2.5 power telescopic sight. While Vance excelled at the numbers, Eli excelled at the feel. He didn't just calculate windage, he felt the crosswind on his cheek. He didn't just use the mil-dot reticle, he knew the bullet drop in his gut. One day, Vance, still cold and aloof, watched Eli put 5 consecutive rounds into a 9-inch plate at 600 yards. "How did you adjust for that updraft, Thorne?" asked Vance, his voice stripped of its usual hostility. "I didn't adjust, Vance," Eli said quietly, breaking the rifle open. "I waited. The draft pushes for 2 seconds, then it drops. You fire in the quiet right before it pushes again." It was not science. It was an innate, lived-in knowledge of the elements. The same knowledge that let him predict the Mississippi floods or the coming of a good harvest. The test of will. The final test of their training wasn't a firing range. It was a simulated mission. They were inserted deep into a reservation wilderness, dropped miles from extraction, with only a small rucksack, their rifles, and a set of objectives. Their final objective? Eliminate a dummy target marked with a red tag, situated on a ridgeline, guarded by 2 armed instructors playing sentries. The men moved for 48 hours, surviving on filtered water and the minimal rations they carried. Vance was all business, focused on the azimuth and range cards. Kessel was the ghost, guiding them through the shadowed paths. Eli was the eye, the quiet force. As they crept toward the final ridgeline, a sudden blinding rain squall hit. The woods turned to slick, muddy chaos. Vance fumbled his map case, and a sudden audible curse escaped his lips. "Damn it!" Kessel immediately clamped a hand over Vance's mouth, his eyes wide. "Noise is death, Tommy. Noise is death." They held position, freezing in the deluge. "We'll wait it out," Vance whispered once Kessel released him. "No," Eli said, his voice barely a breath. "The rain is a cover. It muffles the sound, and the sentries will be looking down, trying to keep the water out of their faces. We move now, while the weather is our shield." Kessel looked at Eli, a thin smile on his face. The hunter knows the moment to strike. They moved. The final ascent was brutal, hand over hand in thick, dripping mud. They reached the firing position, a hidden notch between 2 large boulders, 300 yards from the target. The visibility was poor, the target a dark smudge in the rain. "Tommy, wind?" asked Kessel. He checked his small anemometer. "It's erratic, gusting 15 knots, then dropping to 5, right to left. I'd recommend holding fire." Eli was already settling in behind his M1903A4. He didn't look at the calculations. He looked at the sentries, 2 men huddled under a tarp, clearly miserable. "The gusting is the key," Eli murmured. "The 15-knot gust is pushing the rain. They'll wait for the drop. We fire in the middle. The sound will be distorted, and they won't expect it until the rain is calmer." He took a long, slow breath, held it. The crosshairs settled on the red tag. He felt the wind against his cheek, a momentary lull. The rain was drumming a savage rhythm on the tarp. Squeeze. The sound of a round leaving the muzzle is surprisingly dull at the point of origin.
The dummy target violently jerked, the red tag dissolving in a cloud of shredded wood, a perfect, instantaneous hit. The two sentries jumped up, scanning the line, but the sound, muffled by the rain and the intervening terrain, had given them only a vague direction. "Too late," Eli said, pulling the bolt back, the brass cartridge ejecting into the mud. "Jesus, Thorne," Vance whispered, staring at the destroyed target. "You didn't calculate the wind. You rode it." Kessel just clapped Eli on the shoulder. "You are the best kind of predator, Elias. The quiet kind." A few hours later, at the extraction point, Colonel Vaught was waiting. He didn't look impressed, only grim. "Private Thorne, your score was flawless, but you made a tactical error. Your teammate cursed. That is a failure of team discipline. If Kessel had not smothered him, you would have lost your position." "Aye, Colonel. My failure was not anticipating my teammate's stress and mitigating it beforehand, sir." He looked at him long and hard, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out 3 small custom-made insignia, a tiny, subdued, blackened metal anchor with a superimposed rifle cross, not the standard Marine Corps badge. "The War Department has finalized the deployment. You are no longer candidates. You are the Obsidian Eyes. Your orders are sealed. Your destination, a place the Japanese call the Island of Death. You are authorized to wear this badge on your fatigues. You are authorized to kill anyone who threatens the mission. You are Marines. You are snipers. And you are, every single one of you, expendable." He handed Eli the badge. The metal felt cold, heavy, and lethal. "Welcome to the war, Private Thorne." Eli took the badge, his gaze fixed on the grim future it represented. The farm in Mississippi was a lifetime away. He was now a ghost, a weapon, an obsidian eye, the silent, unseen black sniper of the United States Marine Corps, heading into the bloodiest conflict the world had ever known. The fight to save the world, and the fight to save his soul, had just begun.
The Obsidian Eye, Chapter 2, The Passage to War. The journey from Quantico to the Pacific Theater was a lesson in sustained misery and escalating tension. The 3 members of the newly minted Scout Sniper Team, call sign Obsidian 3, found themselves shuffled through a maze of rail yards and temporary staging camps, their highly classified status meaning they were often treated with more suspicion than reverence. Eli Thorne, Vance, and Kessel boarded a troop transport ship bound for the South Pacific, the USS Wake Island, a cramped, repurposed freighter overflowing with thousands of young men, most of whom had never seen anything more hostile than a mosquito. The Wake Island was a floating microcosm of the segregated nation they had left behind. Eli was the only black Marine in the 2nd Battalion assigned to the ship, a silent anomaly in a sea of white faces. The sight of him, a black man wearing the USMC utility uniform, elicited a range of responses. Open hostility from the Southern draftees, wide-eyed curiosity from the Midwestern farm boys, and a carefully cultivated indifference from the officers. Below deck, the unspoken lines. Eli, Vance, and Kessel were assigned bunks in a small windowless compartment near the ship's bilge, officially to allow for discreet mission planning, but realistically to keep Eli out of sight. The tension between Eli and Vance, the Oregonian sharpshooter, was a perpetual low-frequency hum. Vance was brilliant with the ballistics tables, a master of external factors like drift and Coriolis effect, but he carried a deep-seated, if unconscious, prejudice. One evening, while Eli was meticulously cleaning the bolt action of his M1903A4, Vance was detailing his calculations for a 1,000-yard shot, accounting for a 10-knot crosswind and the slight roll of the earth. "You know, Thorne," Vance muttered, not looking up from his notebook,
It still doesn't make sense to me. Why you? This is specialized work. It's mathematics. It's science. Not instinct. Eli continued polishing the steel, his movements calm and deliberate. Instinct is just quick math, Vance. You calculate 10 knots, I feel the air pressure change. The bullet lands in the same spot. But they put you in the first team. Why not a proven shooter from the regular corps? It's Vaught's pet project, isn't it, to prove a point? Vance's voice was strained, competitive. Sergeant Major Kessel, who was silently sharpening his trench knife, interjected without looking up. Kessel was the unit's anchor, a man whose quiet authority stemmed from surviving fights that Vance and Eli had only read about. "Shut up, Tommy," Kessel said, his voice softer than Eli's, but colder. "Vaught isn't running a social program. He's running a graveyard service. You were chosen for your brain, Thorne for his eye, and I was chosen because I know how to bring a man home. The only point Vaught cares about proving is that we can kill the target before they kill us. The color of the man holding the rifle is only relevant if it makes him harder to see. And Thorne, you're built to be invisible in the jungle. Now both of you, check your pack straps. We make landfall in 72 hours, and I won't have either of you hanging off a palm tree because of a loose buckle." Kessel's intervention didn't solve the underlying racial friction, but it enforced the military necessity of unity. They were a three-legged stool. If one leg failed, they all crashed. The landfall. Hell's Gate. The target was Guadalcanal. The name whispered among the Marines sounded like a death knell. In the pre-dawn darkness of August 7, 1942, the ships arrived off the coast of the island. The massive American invasion fleet choked the horizon, a stunning sight of power and steel. But for the men on the transport, all they saw was the dark, brooding mass of the island, shrouded in jungle mist, a terrifying, unknown landscape. Eli stood on the deck, the thick, hot air hitting him like a physical blow. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and ominously growing mold and decay. This was not the dry heat of Mississippi. This was a humid, primal heat that promised fever and rot. Their deployment was unorthodox. As the main force prepared to assault the beaches and seize the unfinished Japanese airfield, which would be renamed Henderson Field, Obsidian 3 was tasked with a deep insertion. Their mission: advance 15 miles inland ahead of the main force, establish an observation post on a specific ridgeline, and eliminate a key Japanese radio antenna operator. This operator, codenamed WWII, Ghost, was relaying crucial information about American troop movements, causing undue casualties during preliminary skirmishes. They were lowered into a small rubber landing craft well away from the main assault waves. The chaos of the invasion was distant, the muffled, rhythmic thunder of naval shelling, the distant rattle of machine guns, and the shouts of the landing troops. They hit the beach, not on the sand, but in a swampy inlet thick with mangroves and mud. "Stay low, stay quiet, keep your boots dry," Kessel hissed, the veteran instantly taking command. Eli moved first, slipping into the jungle with the seamless grace of a creature returning to its natural habitat. The light was instantly reduced to a murky green twilight. The jungle was a sensory overload, the buzzing of insects, the suffocating embrace of the vines, and the slick mud that threatened to steal their footing with every step. The Japanese, however, were the real threat. They were masters of jungle warfare, utilizing camouflage and silence to devastating effect. On the second night, while taking a brief rest beside a rushing stream, Vance almost made a fatal mistake. He reached for his canteen and started to unscrew the cap. Click, click. A tiny sound, but in the dense silence, it was deafening. Suddenly, a massive boot, Kessel's boot came down on Vance's hand, pinning it to the dirt. Kessel pointed into the thick gloom, toward a shadow near the opposite bank. There was a movement, not a leaf stirring in the wind, but a calculated, human shift. A Japanese sentry, perfectly camouflaged, was watching the stream. The sentry's rifle was leveled at the place where Kessel and Vance were hiding. They were pinned. Eli, who had been watching the opposite flank, instantly registered the danger. He raised his M1903A4, the rifle already threaded with a small, specialized silencer, making the weapon heavier but infinitely quieter. He didn't have time to use the scope. The light was too low. He relied on the rifle's iron sights, his training taking over. The target was 40 yards away, obscured by darkness and foliage. Eli had to identify the point of impact through sheer silhouette. He aimed not for the man's body, but for the dark patch of skin visible between the webbing strap and the rim of the helmet, the occipital notch, a guaranteed, silent kill. He exhaled one final, silent breath. Poof, put.
The sound was barely louder than a sharp clap of hands. The sentry didn't make a sound. His helmet simply tilted forward, and he slumped into the muddy bank, instantly dissolving back into the shadows of the jungle floor. Kessel slowly lifted his boot from Vance's hand. Vance was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "Thank you, Private Thorne," Kessel whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "We all live because you heard a man thinking." Eli didn't respond. He simply scanned the shadows for a partner or a backup, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He wasn't thinking of the man he had killed. He was thinking of the task ahead. He had used a round, and every round was a calculated sacrifice. The summit. Uray's nest. By the third morning, they reached the objective ridgeline, a high rocky outcrop with a terrifyingly sheer drop on one side and a thick, almost impenetrable screen of jungle on the other. The target radio station was not a hut, but a cleverly concealed bunker dug into the earth, powered by a sputtering tiny generator. They could hear the faint, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the key, broadcasting vital intelligence back to Rabal. They set up their hide in a natural depression on the ridge, 800 yards away. This distance was extreme for the M1903A4, pushing the envelope of accuracy for the 2.5x scope. Vance was on the spotting scope, his notebook open. Kessel was on security, his shotgun loaded with heavy buckshot for close-in defense. Eli was on the rifle, setting up his position with painstaking care, laying the ground cloth, building a small sandbag rest, and checking the rifle's level. "Range, 792 yards, Vance whispered, running the numbers. "Elevation, 3.5 mils up. Wind is negligible right now, but we've got a slight thermal distortion rising from the jungle canopy. It's making the image shimmer." "That shimmer is the risk, Tommy," Kessel said, his voice grave. "You miss, and they bring mortars down on this ridge. You hit, and we save dozens of men's lives on the coast." Eli ignored them both. He looked through the telescopic sight. The target was a ventilation pipe sticking up from the bunker, next to the small tent where the operator likely worked. They couldn't hit the operator through the bunker wall, but they didn't have to. The Uray would occasionally step out of the bunker, usually to adjust the small portable antenna or to stretch his legs. The window of opportunity would be seconds, not minutes. Hours passed. The sun beat down, turning the hide into an oven. Eli did not move. He was a statue, his eye glued to the scope, his breath shallow. His mind had detached, becoming a quiet, mechanical instrument focused solely on the sliver of space surrounding the pipe. Vance, sweating profusely, finally broke the silence. "Thorne, we need to adjust for heat distortion. It's worse now. Your crosshair is dancing." "I see the distortion, Vance." Eli replied, his voice flat. "I'm not fighting it. I'm waiting for the moments of clarity." The shot. It was nearly 1,500 hours when the door flap of the bunker shifted. The Uray stepped out. He was a small, thin man, clearly exhausted, wiping sweat from his brow.
He walked toward the antenna mast, turning his back to our position. "Now, Thorne, target is clear," Vance urged, adrenaline spiking in his voice. The target was 800 yards away and moving slowly. The wind held steady. Eli waited. The man reached the antenna mast. He turned, looking toward the ridgeline, possibly sensing something. The man's chest was exposed. Eli did not pull the trigger. He waited until the Japanese operator's hand went up to scratch the back of his neck. The moment the man's elbow went up, it obscured his chest, but his head was fully exposed. Eli fired. The shot was so fast, so precise, that Vance didn't even have time to register the order. Put volat. The operator's head snapped back. He dropped instantly, collapsing at the base of the antenna mast. He never knew where the shot came from. "Confirmed hit," Kessel said, his eye still glued to the security area. Vance was staring through the scope, completely stunned. The body was still. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the radio key, which had been the soundtrack to their entire mission, stopped instantly. The sudden silence was more shocking than the sound of the rifle. "Why the headshot, Thorne?" Vance asked, his voice a bewildered whisper. Eli was already packing up, his movements quick and professional. Headshot is instant termination of command function. The elbow was up. The man's hands were away from his weapon. If I hit his chest, he might have survived the impact long enough to drop into the bunker and scream a warning. We needed him to stop talking, permanently and silently. He looked at Vance. The farm boy's face was pale and shocked. The black man, the outsider, was making the call to abandon him, but in doing so was giving him a chance to live and the rest of the mission a chance to survive. "Do it, Kessel," Vance said through gritted teeth. "Give him hell, Thorne." Kessel looked at Eli, the weight of command settling heavily. He nodded once, acknowledging the terrible necessity. They redistributed the essential gear. Eli and Kessel melted back into the jungle, leaving Vance nestled in a thicket of ferns, his rifle aimed down the ravine, waiting for the inevitable. The true color of war.
Eli and Kessel reached the emergency extraction point 2 days later, exhausted, starved, and covered in leech bites. They were picked up by a PT boat under the cover of a massive artillery barrage being laid down by the main force. On the small, pitching deck of the PT boat, Kessel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "We left him, Eli. We made the choice to save the mission over the man." Eli leaned against the railing, watching the dark, receding bulk of Guadalcanal. "We made the choice to save the two that were running over the one that was broken, Sergeant Major. That's war, and he knows it." Kessel reached out and gripped Eli's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "You're no private anymore, Eli. You're a professional, and you did what I was too soft to do." They returned to the main Marine encampment, now called Henderson Field, a patch of mud and hastily erected tents under constant Japanese bombing raids. They delivered their report to Vought, who simply nodded at the news of Vance's capture, writing him off as a necessary casualty. Later that week, while standing duty near the makeshift communications center, Eli overheard 2 white sergeants talking. "Heard they captured a scout sniper team member, a white kid from Oregon. Must have been a hell of a fight." "Yeah, but I heard the one who got away was the colored one, Thorne. Can you believe it? They're using them for real work now." "Well, you know how they are. Good runners. They probably just used him to carry the white boy's gear until the fighting started, and then he bolted back to the rear." The words were like an invisible bullet, hitting Eli right in the chest. He hadn't run. He had executed a calculated withdrawal under the orders of a superior, saving the mission. Yet his competence was immediately reframed as cowardice and racial stereotype. Eli didn't react. He simply stood taller, the obsidian eye badge now sewn onto his fatigue jacket. He understood Vaught's words now, not just as a mission, but as his life's objective. He was fighting for the right to be seen as competent, as courageous, and as a man, not a stereotype.
His performance had to be flawless, because his failures would be magnified and his victories would be erased. He had a badge, a skill, and a debt to pay. The Guadalcanal campaign was far from over, and Eli Thorne, the silent black sniper, was about to earn a reputation that no amount of prejudice could erase.